All right, guys, another show. It's time for some pre-cals. What's going on today? Robert, I think.
Hey, we've got, I'm telling you, we are the launch pad of the newest technology in the industry here at Sleep Tech Talk. We have Dr. Liran Oren with the University of Cincinnati who's with us today, who's going to be talking about the Vortex PAP. We just had KPAP. Uh, so we've got all of these new technologies and therapies that are on the horizon, and just can't be more excited to hear, about this new therapy that may be super helpful for patients who are struggling to use just standard CPAP therapy.
Yeah, the images look fascinating. It'd be great to hear him, tell the story about that because, when you look at it looks very counterintuitive. It doesn't really line up with what we're used to seeing. So it'll be fun to hear him talk about that.
I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it. Let me get my image of the cup over here. All right, you guys ready? Shall we go
Yeah.
on to the show?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right, on to the show. Now, a word from our sponsor, Medbridge Healthcare. Medbridge Healthcare is a leading provider of sleep lab management services and home sleep apnea testing. Medbridge partners with hospitals, healthcare systems, and medical academic institutions to offer comprehensive, fully integrated services for sleep disorders.
Lights out.
Welcome, everyone, once again to another episode of Sleep Tech Talk, the sleep podcast with your hosts and friends, Emerson Kerr, Robert Miller, and me, Dr. Gerald George Mannikarote. Folks, it's been absolutely fantastic over the past several weeks. Man, our last episode, over 25,000 people and counting have viewed that episode. Has just been so much fun, and we can't thank you enough for your support. And similarly, hundreds and thousands of people are listening to the podcast on all the other podcast platforms. So we ask you to continue to share with your friends. Thank you for all the subscriptions. And we thank you so much for just being there for us. At the same time, we want to give a huge shout out to our sponsors and thank you so much to them. Without them, we can't do this. Talking about doing this, we do this for you. And doing this for you, we have a really special guest today. You know how we are on the cutting edge of technology, and we have some very special news and a special guest for you. And to tell us a little bit about that, Robert, what's going on today?
Hey, Jerry, thank you so much for leading us in here to the podcast today. We have with us today Dr. Liran Oren, who is with the University of Cincinnati. Some of you may have, through the different magazines and publications, seen the recent articles that have been published related to the invention of the Vortex CPAP therapy, or Vortex PAP. And he is a research associate professor there at the university. And we're going to talk to him today about the Vortex PAP, what that looks like, and how the technology might change how PAP therapy is delivered in the future. Dr. Oren, it's great to have you with us today. We appreciate you joining us. And just tell us a little bit about yourself and the program you're working on, and then we can jump right into the Vortex PAP discussion.
Thank you guys for inviting me. Actually, after I got the invitation, I went back and I kind of listened to some of your podcasts, and they're great. So I'm really glad to becoming aware of it. So as you mentioned, Rob, I'm a research professor at the University of Cincinnati. My background is in aerospace and biomedical engineering. So I did my dissertation work in the gas and propulsion lab at the University for Cincinnati. I'm going to do a little name drop here, a little trivia thing, that Neil Armstrong was actually a professor before he went to NASA to go to the moon. He was actually a professor at the University of Cincinnati in the aerospace department. So it's a very good program. And during my dissertation work, I was focusing on, studying the flow dynamics of pulsating airflow, and these are basically what some of these characteristics are vortices. So I've been studying, vortices for, many, many years now. And then after I graduated, or it was already, during my graduate school, I started kind of like, migrating back to the medical field. And after I graduated, I took a postdoc and later became a faculty here in the Department of Otolaryngology. So most of the work that I'm doing has to do with the airflow in the upper airway, but really looking at it more from the perspective of speech and voice disorders. And again, with my kind of expertise is everything about the vortices. So what is the role that the vortices are playing, in voice mechanism and speech? And, we're trying to first understand, the role they're playing, for the normal voice, for the normal speech, and then how things, are different when you have a disorder. And me and my colleagues, we always talked about, this concept of vortices and how we can also leverage them, for a medical device. So the idea that, we can take this vortex airflow, and I'll explain, later what I mean by vortex airflow, but it's not something that we invented. I mean, this has been around for, I don't know, since the 70s, I think, or something like that, in the aerospace world, right? They already figured out ways that they can leverage the properties of this flow, because it's very different than continuous flow, as what we call a flow control mechanism. Not so much, in the medical field. Now, we do know that vortices, play a role, in physiological systems. So, obviously I'm studying the flow of air in the upper airway, like I mentioned, voice and speech, but it's also, in the blood. We know that, vortices develop right above the mitral valve, and, they assist, in the opening and closing of the valve. So that idea is not new, that, vortices, it's very different flow dynamic than continuous flow. And, we can, and our idea was, okay, let's try and figure out how we can leverage that. So that's kind of like how I start this whole project about the leveraging the vortex airflow to treatment of OSA. So that was initially how this conversation started.
So technically, Doc, you're a rocket scientist?
Exactly. Yes. So learned, how to design all the courses, classes. My, graduate work was, in the aerospace, and then kind of trying to figure out how can we take this existing knowledge and apply it in the medical field. And that's exactly what we're doing, even with the Vortex PAP. So,
So one of the things I had wondered about the Vortex, because I did see some of the videos that were produced where you used the little projection device to be able to send the Vortex wave, out with the smoke. Did you start with, trying to eliminate the mask for the patient, or did it truly start with the pressure of a vortex airflow, and then you develop the mask, sort of because of how the vortex needs to be delivered?
So it's the way it started, we kind of knew that if we're going to use these, vortices, we can, pressurize the airway without the need of a sealed mask. And that has to do with the properties of the airflow. So, continuous airflow versus pulsating airflow. And you think about when I say pulsating airflow, it's going to have these train of vortices that is coming out. And maybe we should, take a step back and for somebody who's not familiar, when we say vortex, what do we mean by a vortex? So a vortex, like the textbook definition, is we're saying a flow that has a rotational motion in it. The extreme example of a vortex is a tornado. That's can give you an idea of flow that spins like that, and how much force there is in it. The example that Rob was mentioning, we're kind of like showing the differences, when you kind of blow smoke out, and this is a continuous smoke that is coming out. I'm just thinking about somebody who smokes or vape, and you see it kind of like, moves further from your lips, and then it dissipates very fast. The flow kind of loses its momentum. And then if you change that, and if you know how to blow a smoke ring, produce it with our this air Zuka, the vortex gun we call it, I think it travel all the way across the room. Why? Because the aerodynamic properties are very different. So first, it kind of holds its shape, so it can travel further, and when it travels further, it also kind of create these localized pressures that in case of tornado can lift up your house, but in the airway, you can actually generate this pressure on the lumen, that if we're pulsating it fast enough, then it's almost it is a continuous pressure that is just kind of like holding the walls, giving you the same effect as CPAP, except we don't need this whole effect of pressurizing the or I should say, I'm sorry, the seal around your face.
So isn't the purpose of the turbinates to create that vortex already, anatomically speaking, Doc?
Not as far as I know. I mean, these vortices, they do need some, specific conditions. So that goes back to Rob's questions. How did you go about, designing the thing? So the vortex is formed at the exit from our what we call the nasal prongs, or these nasal cannulas, and I'll show you guys in a second, what it looks like. But that's where they form, and that's what enters into the nostrils. And then, it starts traveling down, the nasal airway into the pharynx. It can start, breaking down. And then by the time it gets to the lung, there's actually the vortex is gone by then. But for the upper airway, which is, what we're interested in, there's still enough characteristics, vertical characteristics, I'm going to call it, that, it's able to maintain, this or pressurize the pharyngeal pressure to create, I should say, a positive pharyngeal pressure with this vortices. So going back to Rob's question about how did we go about developing this. So there are many ways to do generate vortices. As I said, it's been around since the 70s. There's nothing new there. The challenge was how to produce them in a quiet manner, because everything that existed in the aerospace world, they don't really, shouldn't say, but noise is not something they're priority for them, or right. So I spent a lot of years working on this and figure out all the ways how this is not going to work. And then eventually we kind of figure out the way of doing it in a way that is quiet enough. And then, we actually took it, to the sleep lab, and we've shown kind of like, the proof of concept that, hey, this thing can really, control OSA, but we don't need the sealed mask. So the initial design that we had was pretty much, nasal cannulas. That's the idea. You don't need, try to reinvent the wheel. We just went with the simplest design, but we realized, early on that, the actual nasal cannulas are not going to work. When I say, nasal cannula, to me, it means those, very small tubings that, when people walk around with the oxygen tank. So we tried those. The tubing was, a little bit too small. So when, this vortex is coming out, it creates this, sensation of jet that actually coming into your nose. But really, more importantly, it was, you do need, some way of anchoring, the tubing to your face. So with the nasal cannulas, it didn't really stay in place. And, if a person like turns around, in bed, nothing can, pull out. And then that point, it's just not going to work. So we, started another kind of like arm of this project was to develop a new design that is based on nasal cannula that kind of leverage that, but doesn't require the seal anymore. So, we have now this flexibility of, how do we, think it's going to be most comfortable if you don't need the seal anymore to pressurize the airway. So I wanted to show you these two concepts that we have. So the first one is, similar to the, I think they have like, it's called the blip, or basically where, you just have these, stickers. So it just attaches to your face. You're going to have these adhesives, and you're just going to have this tubing. And like I said, the I'm going to remove this. So this has, if you can see, these are the prongs that goes into the nostrils. It's very minimalistic. I was kind of having this, but this will be, like adhesives. You're going to need to replace this every night. But basically, that's all it's going to take, and then the tubes, are just going to come out and then go, this gets connected to the box next to your bed. So that's, one way. And then a similar design. I have it here. So if somebody doesn't want to do it with the those adhesives, so it will be, just with the headgear, similar like this. And then, it's flexible enough so you can adjust, the tubing. So, the prongs themselves, they need to be a little bit, penetrating into your nose, just a little bit, and then you kind of adjust it to feel, that the airflow is comfortable enough, so it's not directed, towards the walls. That's kind of like how we instruct the patients to know that, this thing is aimed correctly. So, you can really feel the pulses hitting, the wall. Then that kind of tells you it's probably not aimed correctly. So, we ask them to adjust it until, you can't feel it anymore. It just feels like, airflow, going into your nose. And yeah, and that's it. So, it's very, very minimalistic. We have, different design because we kind of, from the market research that we've done, we realized, that there's no, one flavor that fits that everybody likes. So we have these, different options. So first, kind of like the anchoring points, there's some that are, more minimalistic, some that are protruding more, less stiff, more stiff. And then, like I said, some of them, you can do just with adhesives. Some of them, are going to be with headgear. So,
Are you a sleep tech looking for new opportunities? Well, Medbridge Healthcare is one of the largest employers of sleep technologists, and they are growing. If you are a sleep technologist interested in a new position, potential paid relocation, or looking for a career advancement, consider a career with Medbridge Healthcare. Now back to the
Dr.
show.
Warren, I have a couple of questions. So I think a lot of times as clinicians, especially those of us who have a respiratory background, when we start thinking about flow, we immediately think of laminar flow. We kind of have our pre-programmed idea of how flow should work. So that's what came to mind first, as we think of how to rethink this. I think that's part of what we would have to understand is the contrast between, laminar flow and this vortex flow. So the thought that came next was really had to do with, if someone is on a CPAP pressure of say 10 on a standard, run-of-the-mill PAP device, what pressure would you think they would be at with the Vortex PAP? Would it be the same pressure, or are you finding that the airway control is different because now we're thinking about closing pressure and loop gain and those kinds of things that can affect how the airway functions? What have you seen with the Vortex PAP when you've compared kind of apples to apples, meaning, what pressure controlled the airway in a regular CPAP versus what pressure would control them in a Vortex PAP?
So we actually now, finally have a paper that is, being reviewed that kind of start, showcasing this. We have, done a lot of work on the advice of our technology transfers office at the University of Cincinnati. They said, don't publish this until we have all the IP and everything sorted out. That's been taken care of. So now we can start publishing this. So one of the things that, is going to be different with the Vortex PAP is that we are not going to be able to titrate pressure anymore. Instead, we're going to need to titrate flow rate because we don't know, now it's an open system, we don't actually know what the pharyngeal pressure is. When I put in the prongs, all I can control is how much flow, goes into the nose. I cannot control what that flow corresponds to the pressure. Now, what we've done, the study that we've done, is that we took these Millar pressure probes, these miniature pressure probes, and we actually inserted them, through the nose all the way, to the retroglossal area, the back of the tongue, typically where the collapse occurs. So, I'm talking about these are like they're 1 millimeter in diameter, these long kind of like, wires, and it just goes all the way back, and they can measure, the actual pressure. And then, we put in the vortex airflow, and we were actually able to measure, we know what the flow rate that we're putting in, that we can measure. That's, always known. But then we can look, what is the pharyngeal pressure corresponding to that flow rate? And, as you might expect, it varies between, people. So if I put in, 20, say, liters per minute, for one person, we measured 8. For another one, 8 centimeters of water. For another one, it was 6 centimeters of water. And for another one, it was 10 centimeters of water. That has to do because the airway resistance is different between people. So as it showed very nicely, the expected behavior that, as you increase the flow rate, right, you see the pressure that we're measuring, very linear relations, it changes because, the airway resistance is constant. So, you kind of see it, increases, but there's really no way to predict if I'm putting in 20 liters per minute, is that means, they're going to get a therapy of 8 centimeters of water or 6 or 10. So, when we did the sleep studies, so what we've done is, we titrated the flow rate, meaning, just like they're doing the pressure titration to kind of see, which level we need to go to control the flow, the OSA. So we had to increase, gradually increase the flow rate until, and for some people it was, 30 liters per minute, and somebody it was, 40 liters per minute. So again, so that will be kind of like the same, sort of like, the same way of approaching it, the same approach, but instead of, doing the pressure titration, it would be like a flow rate titration.
So a question for you, oral venting, how does the therapy handle a patient who because you're trying to deliver through the nares, but the patient's mouth is hanging open. I have to believe that would impact the delivery of the therapy.
So this is, it's a great question because the answers for this is we don't know what we don't know. And let me explain. We know that, we need right now in our, inclusion criteria for the study that we're doing, they have to be, nasal breathers and sleep with their mouth closed. If you open your mouth, pressure is going to come out. That's the nature of the beast. You're just going to lose some pressure. But what we don't know is how much pressure we're going to lose. I can guarantee you that it's not going to be as significant as if you're putting, continuous flow. So, this is the part where we don't know yet, but it could be that, if somebody, we're putting in and just, again, I have numbers, 40 liters per minute, right? So if the mouth is closed, that produces, 10 centimeters of water. But when they open the mouth, that's going to drop to 8. But 8 is still enough, for them. So they'll still be able to use it, even if the mouth is open. I'm just, again, the only thing I can, bet the farm on it is that the pressure, when we're comparing, the apples to apples or apples to oranges, the pressure loss when you open your mouth, if you are injecting continuous airflow, let's say with, the high flow nasal cannulas, that's not going to be, that's going to be much more than if I'm doing, the vortex airflow, because the vortex has this kind of like also directionality effect where, it just wants to kind of like continue moving, down the airway as opposed to kind of like do this 180 and, coming out of the mouth.
So, Doc, with that being said, what about these common side effects that you hear with CPAP, like aerophagia and or even air hunger? Has that come in through your testing?
And that's another, real benefit that it doesn't seem to be an issue. Yeah, we need to test this more, but again, so when the way this thing, basically works is that in the nose, when we're comparing, the to the current CPAP, so CPAP, the way I think about it is kind of like, we're doing this DC shift. We're shifting, the pressure from, where it cycles, plus or minus 1 or 2 centimeters above the ambient when we breathe in and out. So now when we apply the CPAP, say with 10, so now it's gonna cycle, 11 to 9. Oversimplified, but you know what I mean. But the pressure, the pressure difference between the box to the lungs, it's not exactly the same, but there's not, a big difference there. With the Vortex PAP, because it's an open system, there's actually a much greater, pressure gradient, the aerospace term for it. So that means in the nasal cavity, I have actually a much higher pressure, than what is compared to CPAP. At the pharynx, I'm going to have the same pressure, assuming, when I'm kind of like doing this titration to try and match the effect with the CPAP. So if, let's say, somebody, their prescribed pressure is 10 centimeters of water, so I want it to be 10 centimeters of water of pharyngeal pressure. So in the nose, it might be 15. In the pharynx, it will be 10. In the lungs, it's going to be, 2 or so, just like normal breathing. And, again, something that we kind of like mapped this with the pressure probe, as well as we did some computer simulations. It's because the vortex now breaks down and it basically becomes just like high flow therapy. So, that same kind of like a pressure level that you would see with high flow when you're applying. So there's kind of like the pulsation effect and everything that the vortex is giving you, by the time it gets to the lung, is no longer there. So, going back to your question with the aerophagia, it's not an issue because the one of the things that the patients who we tested with, they say that this, this sensation of, this where you're pressurizing your chest, that's kind of like gone. They didn't have it anymore. You don't feel it. The pressure is only, the pharynx, and once you get to the trachea, it's kind of starting to go down lower and lower. So we think that's going to be also, a great advantage of this technology.
All right, before Jerry cuts us off, I have to ask one more question. Commercially available in the U.S., any thoughts about what the timeline would look like to have Vortex PAP into the marketplace for patients?
Sooner the better. There's so many people, who need this, and we really think this thing, can change, a game changer. And obviously, because I'm an inventor this, but everybody we talk to, everybody who tried this, yeah, they all kind of say this is, unbelievable. So right now, what we're doing is we had a grant from the NIH, which was great. We basically we showed early on the proof of concept, but that was, what I've described, at the beginning was a system that was sitting on a cart, controlled by a laptop computer. We tested 6 patients, and we just showed that this can work. We showed that hey, Vortex airflow can control OSA. And then we got the grant from the NIH, and we basically used it to build those nasal interfaces of how we can deliver the airflow, so something a lot more comfortable and sturdy, to make sure that it also doesn't move, as well as a box, right? So something that you can put in your nightstand, and you don't need the engineer to run the system, so the patient can do it. So we just finished that, and the next phase is now to basically start collecting data for the FDA, so we can have that get that approval. So we're starting next month. That's the plan, is to start the clinical study for this. I'm hoping, sorry for the long answer to this question, but probably a year or two, and we're hoping this thing, I'm hoping closer than that, because the level of interest that we got since this thing kind of like went out, and people heard about it is amazing. There's so many emails, and people contact me and asking how can they participate in the study, and what when is this going to be available. So I can live with you guys. For those who are right now, we're just recruiting in the Cincinnati area for people who are interested to participate. And so I will kind of give you the contact where they can go and register, so we can contact them back to coordinate. And yeah, like I said, I'm hoping it's going to happen very, very soon. So
that's absolutely amazing. But I've got to ask this question. I know we're getting on for time, but I just have to ask this question. So you were a biomedical engineer, and then you became a rocket scientist.
Yeah, I thought biomedical engineering wasn't hard enough, so I had to kind of like, let's do the rocket science. I just always was fascinated by flow, and something that was just it's very nerdy, and it's one of those things that really intrigued me, and always been reading about it. And I should have probably well, I'm glad things kind of worked out that way, but I was also thinking about also the aerospace for the undergrad, and then my parents kind of like wanted me to go to med school, so I thought about well, biomedical engineering is somewhere in between. But then I realized, what, I'm just going to be a better engineer than medical doctor. So I kind of dropped the medical school idea and just completely went to the aerospace route. So yeah. And
That's so cool. So now that you're come back full circle, how do you feel? That obviously you've been doing it for years, but now working with patients and working with the healthcare side, how does that feel for you, as a rocket scientist?
I think the most challenging thing is to try, to find the common language, because engineers and medical doctor and clinicians, they talk completely different languages. So what I believe Emerson was saying earlier, laminar flow and turbulent flow, what it means to a clinician is very different than an aerospace engineers. Obviously, they're the same thing, right? But the way they kind of think about it is very different. And I think that's a lot of things. So they're the curse of the expert, I call it. So the things are so obvious to me, but for some people, no. I mean, it doesn't really make sense. So then you kind of talk over their head, and it's really challenging to make sure that we don't do that. Kind of works both ways, even though the medical doctor don't really pay attention as much, and they just use all the medical terms that I sometimes struggle to keep up. But it's important to find that common language, because that's exactly how you can succeed, to make sure you're on the same level, and they understand what you're explaining them. For example, why you don't need a sealed interface to pressurize the upper airway when you use a vortex. For an aerospace engineers, it makes total sense. For everybody else, not. So it's yeah, but I love it. So
Well, that is absolutely awesome. And so thank you so much for that little bit of color to
absolutely,
your origin story. But we are really running out of time, and we can't thank you enough for joining us. But where could people contact you, and also if they want to participate to the study, any information that you can provide right now?
As I mentioned, there is a website. I'll give it to you guys. Maybe you can put it in the comment somewhere.
Okay, we'll put it in the show
a
notes.
link.
Right.
You just go in and you put your information. Again, at this point, just because we're still just doing the study in Cincinnati area. So anybody who's local here and want to participate is welcome to put their information. But we will expand it, probably in a few months to other cities in the U.S. So
good deal. Well, Doc, thank you so much once again for joining us.
Absolutely.
And we sincerely appreciate it. And folks out there, thank you once again for joining us on Sleep Tech Talk. We thank you for all the likes, for all the comments, all the subscriptions, and most importantly, the shares. We have continued to grow because of you. And don't forget, those of you who are listening on the podcast, be sure to look at YouTube. You get to see the actual units that Doc has demonstrated for us. And a huge shout out to our sponsor. We can't do this enough. We can't thank them enough for the support they've provided. So until next time, we say thank you, cheers, and lights on. Before we go, we would like to thank our sponsor, Medbridge Healthcare. Medbridge Healthcare is developing innovative inpatient, post-discharge, and population health programs to screen comorbid conditions, diagnose, and treat sleep disorders. Learn more about their innovative solutions and career opportunities at medbridgehealthcare.com. Once again, you can learn more about their innovative solutions and career opportunities at medbridgehealthcare.com. Time for some post-cals. What did you think, guys?
Yeah, this is another example of how great our podcast is, to be able to hear new, exciting innovation. And in this case, it's so fascinating. Who would have thought that an air pattern could possibly make a difference in what happens with sleep disordered breathing? I mean, we talk about so many different solutions for the patient, and just quite possibly we found something completely different, something totally new, and even challenges some of the thinking we have about how maybe even the airway functions. So a lot to learn, a lot to look forward to.
If ever we needed a whiteboard for a podcast episode, this is the one. where we could, have all of the diagrams and different parts of, because you have to understand anatomy and then also how air moves in different patterns. Um, it's so interesting, and I'm glad that we have people who are in the industry who, came from other places that have absolutely nothing, sometimes in some cases, absolutely nothing to do with the medical background, and taking their space engineering, degrees and using that to help patients with sleep apnea. Pretty amazing.
I agree, man. I was so fascinated. You heard me ask twice. So you're a rocket scientist? It's just, to be able to say, "Hey, I work with a rocket scientist." That's so cool to be able to say that, and then to say, "Yeah, I am a rocket scientist, so you can't contradict me." And for him to say that, "Hey, to be very humble, and say that he still had to learn the language with all of that, I just found that absolutely fascinating.
I agree, and kudos to the University of Cincinnati for having this secondary venture that is essentially a think tank, if you would, of new ideas, new technologies, new ways to do things. If you do a little bit of research on this whole group and what they do, it seems like it's a bit of a venture capital, NIH funding, along with research, to produce some of these new technologies and therapies. So really interesting work that's going on there, and unfortunately, it feels like it's still a little ways out before we're going to see it on the market. But it's fascinating and great that we're able to learn as much as we are, about the new therapy.
Agreed. Exciting times. All right, folks. Gents, ready to call it? I think it was an amazing episode.
Great episode.
Yeah, fascinating.
Well, folks out there, thank you so much once again. Until next time, cheers.